So, Bungie's been coming hot and heavy with the Lightfall info dumps over the past couple weeks. And one of the things that got me genuinely excited was just the mere mention of Two-Tailed Fox. I adore this rocket launcher, always have since it was released back in Forsaken. But I'm the first to admit that it never really made its way to being an optimal pick. I always thought that it might be a little bit better than a lot of players were giving it credit for, but by no means a real contender as a top tier heavy weapon option. Changes are a-coming with Lightfall though. Bungie's tuning this thing to be the only weapon that can apply multiple subclass verbs without extra steps. And then they hinted about an incoming catalyst that will add arc damage to this weapon as well. Why is this important? Well, outside of the base effects of each subclass verb, which on their own are quite useful, they're being given specific anti-champion functionality. So things could get pretty interesting for Two-Tailed Fox once Lightfall rolls in. So in this video, we're going to take a look at where Two-Tailed Fox sits currently. I'll gather the damage numbers, run some comparisons, and I did find something unexpected when doing so, but then we'll theorize about how Two-Tailed Fox may be performing in the future. If you're not familiar with this weapon or just need a refresher, it's a heavy exotic rocket launcher. But instead of firing a single rocket on a trigger pull, it's going to fire two. One solar, one void. Currently, the solar rocket applies a burn effect to enemies, and the void rocket will suppress targets, at least any target that is able to be suppressed. And these rockets do have tracking on them, so it is a pretty user-friendly weapon. When looking at the weapon's damage output though, I did find some concerning and interesting results. First, testing versus Carl, whose damage received is reflective of a baseline major tier target. Each of the rockets fired from Two-Tailed Fox scores 9,696 points of impact damage and 33,975 from the blast. We're also getting 5 ticks of burn damage at 816, for a grand total of 91,422. And just to get a sense of where this lined up, I just wanted to run it against a baseline bare bones rocket launcher, like this adaptive 20 round per minute Apex Predator. Tracking and snapshot are the perks, so no damage boost there, and I don't have a spec mod applied. The only help that it is getting is from impact casing, giving it 10% more damage on the impact alone. So, a single rocket from Apex Predator sees 23,465 points of damage from the impact and 74,744 from the blast. Total damage dealt, 98,209. So that right there is kind of a big oof for Two-Tailed Fox. Having a legendary rocket launcher without any active damage perks, surpassing the damage output of our exotic by about 7,000 points, isn't really a good look. Concerning? Absolutely. But it's not all doom and gloom here. I moved over to Europa to test against the baseline boss tier target, and I was a bit confused by what I was seeing here. Apex Predator saw its damage on the impact drop to 21,084, and then the blast damage was decreased to 67,162. This results in 88,246 points of damage dealt from a single rocket. That's about 10% less damage, which is not at all unexpected when moving up to a boss tier target. Two-Tailed Fox, though, saw the impact damage increase to 11,326. The blast damage from each rocket climbed to 39,687. And the burn also moved up to 954 per tick. So, total damage dealt here, 106,796. A 17% damage increase from the numbers that we saw when testing versus Carl. So, Apex Predator outdamaged Two-Tailed Fox by about 7.4% versus a major target, but Two-Tailed Fox's damage was 21% better versus a boss tier enemy. Now, I don't know if I missed something in the deep dark recesses of a weapon tuning past at some point, but I don't think I've ever personally tested a weapon whose damage increases when stepping up to a boss tier enemy. So I tried to get to the bottom of this. I made damn sure I didn't have any damage buffs active during any of my tests, so I could rule that out right off the bat. Then I thought another possibility could be a hidden intrinsic trait. Something similar to Hawkeye Breach armaments. Extra damage versus vehicles and constructs, which as Hydra does fall under. But after jumping lost sectors and testing versus the Minotaur boss, I registered the exact same damage values. Then I thought maybe it's an exotic rocket thing. So I pulled out Truth just because it's the most straightforward to test. 67,950 points of damage versus Carl and 61,036 versus the Minotaur. That's about an 11% damage reduction. So we're not looking at something that's specific to all exotic rockets. So I don't know how to call this one. It's an oddity. If you know something I don't, by all means, drop it in the comments. It just appears to me that Two-Tailed Fox is tuned to do more damage to bosses. But regardless, does that mean Two-Tailed Fox has actually been a sleeper meta pick all this time? No. Remember, when we were testing Apex Predator, that was pretty much just baseline damage. Any damage perk providing a 20% buff on an adaptive or an aggressive frame rocket launcher puts it right on level footing with Two-Tailed. If you throw on a boss spec as well, it's gonna surpass it. Like in this case here, it's a lasting impression heretic and it hits the Hydra boss for about 110k. Then you gotta factor in, legendary rockets can get perks that can speed up their reload, which is a category that Two-Tailed is a bit lacking in. And with some legendaries, you can get multiple rockets loaded within a single magazine. Plus, if you're using it in a team setting and one of your friends brought along Galahorn, legendary rocket launchers can be granted Wolfpack rounds for even more damage. So while I do love this rocket launcher, it's just not quite good enough in its current state to be a real contender as far as a heavy weapon damage dealer goes. And it pains me to say that's kind of been the story of its existence. But the future, and I think this might be a good time to get a small disclaimer out of the way. If you're a veteran player or someone who does their fair share of damage testing, you're already going to know this. But come Lightfall, there's a 99% chance that overworld damage scaling is going to change a bit. I'm pretty sure it happened with every major expansion release with Destiny 2. The perceived damage numbers, the numbers that are actually popping up on screen when you damage an enemy, are going to shift from what we're seeing now. They might be higher, they might be lower, but they're probably not going to be the same. But this does not mean that your weapons, or abilities for that matter, are getting inherently stronger or weaker. Unless of course there is a targeted change made by Bungie to a specific weapon or weapon archetype. It's an all-inclusive blanket change, a game-wide shift in PvE activities. But still, this kinda sucks from a content creator perspective, because while it doesn't necessarily negate the work that I did over the past year, all of the perceived damage numbers in those videos aren't gonna line up with this year's damage numbers. And like I said, most veteran players do understand this, but for a newer player or just someone not in the know, it can be kind of confusing. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as we move into Lightfall or talk about any changes that are going to be implemented in Lightfall. Like these adjustments being made to Two-Tailed Fox. Some of the changes we know, and we can make an educated guess on how it's going to affect the weapon's performance. Others will be more or less speculation, but I still think it's an interesting and worthwhile conversation to have ahead of time. Things that we know for sure. The burn damage from the solar rocket is being transitioned to scorch damage. That means it's going to carry scorch stacks as well. 60 at base, 90 if you have Ember of Ashes equipped on a solar subclass. This is going to put the damage in line with a heavy scorch, which I actually did a lot of research on back in Season of the Haunted. A heavy scorch applying 60 scorch stacks is going to see 14 damage ticks, totaling out to 8,660 points of damage. And that does move up to 20 ticks at 15,639 points of damage with Ember of Ashes. So in either case, that's just an outright improvement on Two-Tailed Fox's current burn damage. But with each solar rocket carrying 60 scorch stacks at base, if you can get a reload in and get the next volley of rockets on a target before stacks begin to fall off, you will spark an ignition. Currently, that's 36,166 points of damage, at least versus a baseline major tier target. And in Lightfall, an ignition will be able to stun an unstoppable champion. For the Void Rocket, functionally nothing is changing with it. It currently suppresses enemies, it will continue to suppress enemies. But in Lightfall, the suppression effect will disrupt Overload champions. So Two-Tailed Fox is gaining some additional damage and some additional utility. But is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? Giving subclass verbs anti-champion capabilities opens up a lot of different avenues to combat champions. So Two-Tailed Fox's net gain in utility might not seem as valuable or as enticing from a holistic perspective. But the wild card of the situation, the big question mark, and the thing that I think will ultimately determine how good Two-Tailed Fox is moving forward is the alluded to catalyst. All that we really know about it is that when speaking about the elemental damage types on the weapon, Bungie said that it would complete the trifecta. So arc, presumably, but we don't know how it's going to be implemented. Is Two-Tailed still going to fire 2 rockets but cycle through the 3 elemental damage types? Or would the catalyst actually allow a 3rd rocket to be fired on a single trigger pull? If that's the case, how are they going to tune the damage? Keep it in line with what it is now and split it evenly between 3 rockets? Or is Bungie looking at Two-Tailed saying, yeah, it needs a buff? A 3rd rocket hitting for full damage would up the output by 50%, which could be a little bit more than they'd want to give it. I don't know. But then another question, what effect, if any, would be tied to this arc rocket? I would assume it's getting an arc subclass verb as well, at least that's what I gathered while reading the article. It could be an arc blind, which in general use cases would feel a little bit redundant alongside the suppression effect, but it would make for an easier way to stun an unstoppable outside of needing to spark an ignition with the solar rockets. Or maybe they'll give it Jolt. We'll have a rocket launcher that can scorch, suppress, and jolt targets all at the same time. Sounds pretty wild, but I'll tell you what, that's a change that would get it in my hands a lot more often. But I suppose we're just gonna have to wait and see how much of a push forward Bungie is willing to give this thing. However it pans out though, I really hope that it's enough to make Two-Tailed Fox a viable pick moving forward. I mean, it's a cool weapon, it's a fun weapon, and it's been waiting its turn for a long time. I hope it gets its shot. But hey, if you have any additional thoughts, be sure to drop them down in the comments. I'm always interested to hear the community's take on things. Consider leaving the video a like if you did enjoy it. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to catch more of my Destiny 2 content. You guys are awesome, and I'll catch you on the next one.